Hey everyone, this is WobblyWallaby. Many people have said Fenrir has insane DPS potential, and I have seen it outperform Ronins and Rathgricys in instances as well. But one factor that many people look for in DPS classes is survivability. After all, a dead DPS is no use. In this video, I'll show my tanky Fenrir build that sacrifices some damage for survivability and doesn't use the HP Relic as well. Since your DPS is high enough, you can actually give up some of your damage and you'll still do better than some of the other classes. There are people that can do more than 200 million damage to the bosses, but since Legend Museum and Isle bosses have damage caps, you won't actually be hitting for that high, so you can actually sacrifice a bit of damage. In previous attempts with the Legend Dragon, I had tried the full glass cannon build, where I didn't have much vit or survivability. I mostly relied on anti-death food. I kept dying, but with this new build, I could actually survive and do much better than before. In fact, I could clear a lot of Legend instances just with this change. So luckily, even if you don't have a tank or a fake parry from a saint, you can still do very well by yourself. I'll show my setup first and then show my other Legend runs after. Here's my gear overview, my armor, garment, weapon card, and tail. All of this is survivability. I'm focusing more on the HP gear since all my other DPS gear is pretty standard for Fenrir. For shot equipment, I'm using DPS gear and I have no HP Relic. Against the Legend Dragon, I was using Title Armor with 20% elemental reduction, HP percentage enchant, and Argo P card to deal with poison. The elemental reductions are to deal with fire. For garment, I'm using Glorious Shoulder Badge for the HP percentage with the skill damage reduction random attribute. I also have the Divine Blessing enchant. For card, I use the Jack card with another Jack card deposited for a huge fire damage reduction. For tail, I use Emotional Cleaner for the skill damage reduction. For enchant, I have the max HP percentage. Next, the Divine card is really good for survivability as a weapon card since it gives you 30% chance to gain 20% of the damage as HP regen. This is consistent enough to keep your HP high and you don't have to rely on popping potions non-stop. Next for attributes, I choose to max Vit and Dex first, then Agi for 480% attack speed, and the rest into luck. Although luck does give you more survivability with Fenrir's Lunar Eclipse, I found being super tanky with Vit was good enough and I didn't have to overly rely on this skill. Next are stats. For HP, I have 981,000 HP, which is nice and tanky. I have 25,000 attack, 480% attack speed, 96.9% penetration, 136 critical, 190% critical damage, 123.2% damage, 81.2% physical damage increase, and 110% water damage. The reason why I don't use water accessories is you have a ton of water damage already, so focusing on other attributes is better. In PvP, you can certainly use them if people have high water resist. Next for Adventure Handbook, I'm using 75% deposit. I've heard that Fenrirs have amazing DPS even at 50% range, so it's a great option for mid-level deposits. Next for skills, Fenrir is quite simple to play. In my manual and auto bar, I have Frost Moon Arrow. This gives you an insane 30% auto attack damage increase, but it also converts to water, which is fine. I was able to use water against all the legend bosses. Next on manual, I have Ice Prison. This is a nice debuff since chained enemies take 20% more damage. Next on manual and auto is Twilight Attack, which gives you a lot of piercing and critical damage for 30 seconds. You also have 5 auto attacks triggering Piercing Arrow, and Piercing Arrow gives you a big burst. Next in manual is Moonshadow Barb. This makes you roll and shoot 3 penetrating arrows in a fan shape. The interesting thing here is the 1 second of invulnerability when rolling. If you time it just right, you can dodge damage, although it's not very consistent. You can also spam this skill often to try to dodge in case you can't time it well. Previously, I made the mistake of not spamming this enough, so I was getting hit more often than I should. Then finally I have auto attack. Sometimes when you get hit, you will flinch, so spamming auto attack manually in the bar lets you bypass this. Next for Advanced Runes, here's my Moon Prison Rune, my Frost Arrow Star Rune, my Star Luna Blade Rune, my Impeding Doom Star Rune, and having a high first line here is great. This one increases your range like crazy. And then next my Wolf Raid Rune, and finally my Ice Prison Rune. For Arcane Runes, I use White Blade Rune when the enemy is close, then when I'm further away I use the Transmission Rune, and I had the War Preparedness rune for generating a self-shield for more survivability. Next is my fight against the Golem. I cast self buffs, then Ice Prison for the debuff. I always use the Fear Arrow since it gives you race damage bonus by 30%. Since the Golem is weak to water, this is an easy fight. Here I show I can tank his damage pretty well too since I'm tanky. Usually with other classes you might die from getting hit from this. When placing the rock with lower HP, I usually hit the anti-death, but with almost 1 million HP, this is fine. The Golem goes down. Next I show my gear that I had used. I didn't use the Jack card for the Legend Isles run, I just used this MVP damaging card. I also used the Chapet Star card since I didn't have a better accessory card versus the Golem. The 100 raw attack is nice. For other ones I tend to use the racial cards. Next for floor 2, I swap in one ghost damaging accessory card. I cast self buff, then Ice Prison, then attack. I am mashing my auto attack to not flinch. This is why I'm not using Moonshadow Barb a ton. I do use Moonshadow Barb when I want to periodically dodge his hits, or at least attempt to. The Sea Spear Totem goes down. Next is floor 3, this one definitely helps to be tanky. I cast self buffs, then Ice Prison. I use Moonshadow Barb to try and dodge his hard hits. I also try to burst him down quickly. Next is phase 2. It gets a bit messy, but luckily Moonshadow Barb has great AoE and can clear the mobs. Then I focus on Strophe. Then I take down the red orb. Then target the heart. I try to burst it down with the Moonshadow Barb, which I find is a nice burst. Then for phase 3, I self buff again and then Ice Prison. I do lots of Moonshadow Barbs this time to avoid damage. He hits really hard and I don't want to die. Finally he goes down. I show my final gear. I had used the Ultraman card here as my accessory card. With this tanky gear, Fenrir is definitely a better DPS class for my playstyle. I didn't like playing glass cannons before. I also like that it can definitely solo legend instances. So with this tanky build, it can definitely take down some bosses that I would consider S tier for any other classes attempting so I would actually recommend Fenrir now. For the tanky build that I use versus the Legend Museum Dragon, you can also tank the PSR Dragon too. You can even tank the Giant Explosion, but I think the biggest problem is my damage is too low now because I sacrificed too much DPS, so it isn't ideal for PSR, but at least you can survive it and not die all the time. If you want to play Fenrir and not die constantly, I do recommend you swap out some gear for survivability and invest in Vit. This class is still crazy strong, and this is definitely a class I would recommend now. With my upcoming tier list, I'll put this class pretty high up, now that I know that it can be tanky and still do damage. And if you have a party with the Saint that can give you Faith Prey or a tank, then you'll do fine. You can just go straight up DPS and absolutely murder the bosses. And if you're Fenrir that's joining a public party, I hope people won't kick you out because this DPS is quite insane, and you just might end up carrying those fake Ronins and fake Rathgricys. If you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, and subscribe. Here's a video that I recommend. And if you want more Fenrir content, check out this playlist over here.